DeSanto Propane is 4 generations strong as a trustworthy family-owned business with unmatched customer service. Go online at DeSantoPropane.com for more info or call toll-free at 1-800-752-4574. Since 1937, the difference has been DeSanto Propane. From FingerLakes1.com, this is Inside the FLX. A little more than a month ago, the town of Marion welcomed a new town supervisor. Summer Johnson won a contested race in November and took office at the start of 2024. She joined us in studio this week to talk all things Marion, Wayne County, and more importantly, what it's going to take to maintain communities like the one she serves in the future.
You know, now that I'm in there and I've started to see the operations and the fiscal management of the town, I'm glad I made that decision to give it 100% of my time and full-time attention, just due to the fact that it's been a little neglected over the years and not of malicious intent. Just, I think, as we discussed earlier, you know, I think a lot of times these roles are part-time. There may be a retirement subsidy, you know, and people take them on to have that role filled. And so, you know, I decided to quit my full-time job in marketing and communications to take this on so I can give it full-time attention. And that doesn't mean just sitting in the office at my desk from 9 to 5. Really, I'm a mobile person. So the attention I'm giving Marion is being out there in the community, talking to people, shopping at all Wayne County locations and merchants. You know, I work from home often. I'm on my laptop. I'm answering emails. I'm putting together marketing, you know, flyers, information, you know, planning, status sheets, things like that. And then I do office work where it's more hands-on, where they actually need my signature for a lot of things. So that's the kind of attention that it deserves. And hopefully I'm giving it. I think so.
You might be the only non-retired elected official at a town or county level that I'm aware of in our region that walked away from their career to do this work. Walk me through what that conversation was like with your family and how much time you actually took to come to that point where you decided it was for the best to make this your full-time effort.
Yeah, so it definitely was a decision that was not taken lightly. It was months of discussions with my husband and my other family members, my mom, my dad, my brothers even, you know. And it was something where my husband has always been so supportive of me. You know, one summer I told him I'm running for Congress. And he said, okay. You know, he really allows me to take off full speed, but he's also there to pull me back if things get a little crazy. So having that safety net and a partner really allows you to, you know, take those chances in life. And 9 times out of 10, they work out pretty well. So I was working full time, you know, like I said, in marketing communications. It was a great job, great people, great company. For our Optimax Systems in Ontario. They're growing. It's an optics manufacturing company. They're growing rapidly. There was plenty of room for advancement. I had a great team. And, you know, but politics and public administration is my passion. It always has been. You know, I went to school for it, learned about municipal budgeting, fiscal operations, things like that. And I felt that I wasn't being able to apply that in my full-time role that I was in.
Yeah.
So that was an easy decision there. However, I'm a human. So it's still after election night, you know, I waited 2 weeks to have that discussion with my boss. Just because I really was avoiding that discussion. I really, like I said, loved the company and loved what I did. But at the end of the day, you know, I had my whole family behind me, supporting me to follow my dreams and my passion. And that's what I did. And so far, so good.
Was there a part of you that thought, if I don't, who will? To give it that kind of effort, and I don't mean to minimize other working age folks who are, holding elected office at town and county level across our region. But to take that step, I would imagine there had to have been a bit of an existential concern you had for Marion when you looked out 5-10 years that brought you to that point of saying, we don't just need somebody who's going to be working really hard on these important issues. We need somebody who's going to be giving it their every bit all along the way. Was that part of the calculation for you in your brain?
It was, but I also think for me, it was bigger than Marion. I'm a constitutionalist, and for me, I was looking at the county, the state, looking outward, and just, seeing our elected officials, who they were, how long they've been in office, comparing cities to towns, to the resources, the funding. And I came to the conclusion that, my generation is lacking in civic responsibility. And that was a huge driving force for me to say, this is the time, this is now, I have to do this. Again, the energy you need, the ambition, the charisma, the public facing persona that you need. I don't necessarily think we're getting that from our elected officials, from the state, some counties, on down. We're just not getting that. And if we're not getting that, that means we're not exciting the next generation of public officials. And we see across the board that no one wants to run. No one is jockeying for a position. I was unopposed on the Republican ticket.
Yeah.
There was no Democrat candidate, and there was one independent candidate who very lately put their hat in the ring. Yeah. So to me, that says, well, what if I didn't run? There would be no one who would run the town. Yeah. It was a very scary thought of so someone has to do it. But at the same time, like I said, we want quality as well. I think anybody can run for office. I encourage everyone to look at it and run for office, either be school board, town board, planning board, library, trustee board, any kind of civic office to really get yourself more involved in the town. So that's what I looked at, was the future, who are going to take these roles, and we need to start kind of exciting them a little bit. And I don't think we're getting that.
What's the biggest thing at the local level that's hurting engagement from, I would say anyone from about 45 to 48 down the chain through millennial generation, and especially among Gen Z? We're not really seeing that engagement, like you said. What's the biggest thing at the local level that's hurting that or holding that back right now?
Mm-hmm. I think the lack of transparency over the years and trust is really the driving factors there. As long as I can remember, officials seemed like untouchable, unapproachable. Like they were just too big to even think about talking to or engaging in. And we still have that. We still have that today. Some of my, off time, if I have it, I do other things with lobbying and things like that. And I see it there is you send an email or you call an office of a representative and you don't get a response and you get blown off. And we see that at the local level as well, where someone brings a concern to the table and it's not discussed in a public open meeting forum. It's not addressed. They don't return emails. And so you do that once or twice to someone, they're just going to stop. They really are. And that's a problem. In Marion specifically, we have an older population. Our average age is, I think, 50, 51. But we are seeing an influx of younger families come in. And I'm seeing the opposite. They are looking for engagement. So now my issue is I have to find them something to engage in. Okay, so they're seeking it. They're seeking to get involved. They want to volunteer. They want programs. They want events. They want town halls, but we don't have any. So I guess it's not a bad problem to have.
Yeah. When you look at that demographic split, I would imagine you have this growing population of younger folks, younger families, but then you have kind of the stable older generation that's been around for a long time in Marion. What are the issues that those two groups are identifying as the biggest ones for the town, and where is the crossover, if there is any?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I actually have a really good example of what actually happened to me just recently. I had an older citizen who has been a lifelong Marion resident, generational, I call that. And he sent me a very well-written letter that, God bless his heart, I called him up 5 minutes after he sent it, and he's like, "Oh, hi. I want to talk about your letter." He's like, "Okay." He's like, "I wasn't expecting a phone call." I'm like, "Well, here I am." And he said it took him months to draft that letter. Months. And that's how much thought he put into it. And his letter addressed things that were things that have been neglected, that have been brought up several times over the years, that still have no solution, that still have not been resolved. So for him, that was what was bothering him. And some of his biggest concerns were, hey, we talked about this in 2015. Why isn't it completed? We talked about this in 2018. Where are we at with this? And so we had a great conversation. We talked for over an hour on the phone, and we had a lot in common. We agreed on a lot of different, areas. And then the opposite of that spectrum is, one of my biggest supporters is a young family that live on Main Street in Marion. They like every single Facebook post. They share, they comment, they've come to meetings, they've come to rallies, they sign my petitions. Just a really great young family with young kids. They're active in the community. They participate in the library programs. And some of their concerns are the lack of programs for kids, the consistent programs for kids, not just we're waiting around for 2 weeks to see if there's a sign up for this year. And so they're looking for, obviously, it makes sense for a young family. They're looking for stability in programming for their children. And so I thought that was very interesting, split down the middle. But then a lot of the crossover that I'm seeing between the younger families and the older generation is infrastructure issues. That seems to be kind of the Venn diagram issue there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you think about Marion being a place, a destination for young families, given where it is right now, not where you'd like to see it in 5 or 10 years, what do you think it is that's drawing younger families to Marion as opposed to any other place that they could settle in Wayne County right now?
Well, what drew me to it? It's quiet. It's rural. It's not hustling and bustling. I mean, it really is. When me and my husband were looking for houses, we didn't even know there was a town that existed. We just went and looked at our house on the outskirts, and we're like, yeah, we love it here. So we had no idea there was more to Marion. We just love the area and the geography of it. It's a wetland. I think a lot of families are really starting to move out of those busy, crowded suburbs, and they want to sprawl out a little bit, which makes sense. We're seeing a huge trend. Walworth is growing exponentially, and I wouldn't be surprised if within the next 5 years, 10 years in Walworth, there's more housing developments, tract housing, apartments, things like that. And we're going to be careful with that, because where Marion is now, I would like to maintain that peacefulness without overcrowding it. It's a delicate balance. We don't even have a stoplight. I think people like the fact that there's less formalities in town. Yeah.
I balance that with the concern that, frankly, a lot of folks do have in every rural community across the region who's watching population decline. Because there is the existential concern, I guess, for a lot of folks. You mentioned, had you not run, potentially not having a town supervisor candidate or whatever the case may be there. But also just that curiosity about what or how a town like Marion, or any number of different communities, will be able to balance a budget and maintain services and have the community that has existed for many decades now in another 10 years when the aging population is shrinking and continuing to shrink, and that total population loss continues to grow over time.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the population loss is a big concern. Wayne County has seen it, at the county level. The state certainly has seen it at the state level. And as far as Marion goes, we don't have current census numbers yet, but I think I would like to say, just from what I know from the last census that was done and some, I would say, preliminary data I've seen, it's plateaued. I don't think we've been hit as hard as a lot of other areas, just because we do have those strong generational ties to Marion. I think that helps us a lot, kind of address the population decline. And in order to address that, I'm also working with the school as well. I've reached out, I've had meetings with the school superintendent, the school board president, and we're trying to link arms as well to address that because of their enrollment numbers. There's been a decrease in enrollment across the board. For them, there's been an increase in homeschooling. And in Wayne County, I think it's 6% of the students are homeschooled in Wayne County. And in Marion, I believe the number is around 13-14% of families are homeschooled. So, that means these families are still here. Mm-hmm. They're just structured differently. And we need to address that and make sure that we're keeping their interest and we're keeping our level of services at least plateaued, for a little while until we can have a boom.
Housing. How do you mentioned that's something that you want to approach carefully. Yeah. I would imagine that includes maintaining the feel of the community that everyone who's lived in Marion for the last many decades continues to have that same feel moving forward. How do you approach that, and what then becomes of the goals? So what are the goals for the next 2 to 3 years, and then looking out to 5 and beyond that?
So housing is tricky, as we know, in rural communities. There's a lot of stigma behind what type of housing is around, is allowed, is zoned for. And I want to first start by removing that. I've even recently had certain board members, still have that thinking of affordable housing as, a social and economic disadvantage and what that brings to a town as far as, some biases that are surrounded those types of housing. And we won't stand for that. It's more than providing poor people housing. That's not what it's about. And I think there's an educational gap. Like I know we talked about before about what is affordable housing and what does it mean? And, I think there's a lot of people that misconstrued that intention. And we have to address it because we have an aging community. So where are they going to live? We have to address it because we do have younger families that maybe are moving out of Rochester that want smaller classrooms, more peaceful setting, less traffic, safer areas, neighborhoods for their children. Where are they going to live? Not everybody can afford the rural lifestyle either. Let's not mistake rural living isn't cheap. That doesn't mean it's cheap.
There's a lot more driving.
It's a lot more driving, a lot more miles on your car. Our taxes are comparable to surrounding areas, and the housing costs are still the same, even though it's in Wayne County and I have more trees than pavement, so we have to look at that and say, what's the solution to people who can't afford a $200,000 house? There's nowhere to go. And so those people are going to go to the places that have it. Driving through different towns, even on my way here, Newark, Geneva, all these back towns. I saw apartment buildings. I saw, little developments, little cul-de-sacs. And I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility to develop in Marion. And I think it needs to develop. Because if we don't, if you build it, they will come. Yeah. We need more people to support our town. And when I say more people, I don't mean thousands of people. in a small town like Marion, the benefit of having 5, 6, more families in town is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've heard floated from just people in different communities, when it comes to these housing developments, it's interesting because you mentioned affordable housing as being this thing that a lot of people are resistant to. It seems there's almost equal resistance to the idea of throwing in a tract of housing that's that's featuring a bunch of homes that are $250,000, $350,000. But the reality is that middle market housing, or even just slightly below middle of the road housing, is far more expensive than it ever has been in the past. What is the solution to finding those? I imagine what you're describing is essentially housing that fits in that 125 to 175,000 range. What's the solution? And are rural communities kind of uniquely positioned to be able to capture some of that? Since if you are in one of the suburbs of, say, Rochester, or even if you're closer to a Victor Farmington, all housing is naturally going to be more expensive in those places.
Yeah, I do believe so. I think if we have an opportunity to kind of catch a spillover of people who can't afford the Victor taxes in homes, but who don't want to live in an apartment building,
right,
on 104, right? Yeah. So I think we are in that unique position where if we took our time and worked with a very, ethnical developer, we could produce, in my mind, I envision, condos, that are designed and styled to fit the rural landscape. And, we already have a section of them on Route 21, and they are pleasant. They're nice looking. You can't even, if you blink, you miss them.
Yeah.
So I think we have room for more of that development for sure, where we can capture, a dozen or so families or elders, first floor living, right, is going to be big. We also got to take that into consideration. So there's room for that. We have some zoning for it. I think it's just a matter of, again, getting the information out there to the public and getting them on board and getting all the stakeholders to the table.
Mm-hmm. Main Street. Like you said, it's a rural community. It isn't what most people would envision being a main street. Yeah. But when it comes to having some sort of growth on Main Street and using Main Street as kind of your centerpiece for economic development, which everybody's going to say every community needs economic development. Mm-hmm. What kind of opportunities do you see existing there for Marion? And what would be your vision for success on that front over the next several years?
Yeah, so Main Street has been a hot topic in Marion for quite a while. We have, over the years, I know we have received a lot of grants and support and other initiatives to, renovate, refresh Main Street. It looks very nice. You drive through and you wouldn't tell that the stores are empty. So it's very well at kind of hiding some of, those factors, which I'm happy with, I'm fine with that. We just finished remodeling Jenny House, which is our town museum. That is going to be open to the public. That is a beautiful feature to have on Main Street. But we're still lacking new business. So we have a couple of really strong businesses on Main Street. Lollipops and Polka Dots is one of them. It's a consignment shop. We have a personal photographer. She has a studio on Main Street. There's an Sullivan Insurance is there. And we have a new dog groomer. Forgive me, I don't remember the name, but it's right on the corner. And they take up most of Main Street. It looks nice. However, we're still looking for more. Right. We need, more services. I'd like to see a real estate company in there, promoting the land that's for sale, promoting houses that's for sale locally. I'd like to see a bank back in the old M&T building. That building is for sale at a steal. I was just talking to a representative at the Wayne County Economic Development, and she's like, it's like $200,000 for that building. Yeah. It's a steal on a corner of a, Main Street. So I'd like to see a local bank back. That's some of my goals. just so people, again, don't have to drive out of town for their banking needs, and we've done a lot of painting. I know the town hall, the town court, we have new awnings, new painted buildings. So the attention is there. It is getting the proper attention it needs. So it's not, decaying. It's being upkept, which I think is very important right now. I just think we need to be, and when I say me, I mean at the board, we need to be more aggressive at seeking out businesses to come here.
Yeah. Let's shift gears and talk about some county issues. First and foremost, Wayne County has full-time election commissioners. Mm-hmm. We just had Mindy Robinson on a couple weeks ago here. It was a really great conversation. And I'm going to ask you one of the questions I asked her because you actually lived through this last election cycle, which was not the best. What was that like going through election night, not knowing what was happening, and then the hours and days that followed that when it looked like from the outside there was a lot of criticism all of a sudden on what Board of Elections either had done or not done. Mm-hmm. What take us through that whole time frame from your point of view? Yeah, no, absolutely.
So at first, I'd just like to say Mindy is an amazing resource. She deserves that role, and she is very knowledgeable and someone that I leaned on a lot during my campaign, and even now. I think I was just emailing her the other day. So I'm really happy that she's able to provide more of her time and services to the county. That election night was interesting. I, like any other person, thought, by the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock news at the ticker, we would, be seeing results. And I had my family over. They live about an hour away, and they were there. My brother, I had champagne ready. And so that was going to be our night. Then, the polls close and we're all waiting around anxiously and watching TV and things. And then I start seeing numbers come in and I'm like, okay. And by 10 o'clock, nothing, no calls, nobody called me, just silence, radio silence. So I'm like, okay. So at that point I was ready. I was like, you know what? Be in the morning. I'm one of those people, I can go to bed and I like the anticipation of a surprise in the morning. I'm like, it's okay. I'm just going to go to bed, call it what it is.
Yeah.
My parents got ready to leave. Unfortunately, they were in their car in the driveway when I got a phone call from the Marion Republican chair, who gave me some preliminary results. And that is what I went on. And so I called my parents back in the house. We popped the champagne. It was close. I think at that point, that night, it was by 24 votes. Yeah. Is that I've won. So we drank some champagne and we were celebrating. And then I said, well, guys, don't say anything on Facebook. Let's just keep this between us because they're not official. They're not even like close to being official. And so they went home. And then the next day I woke up to quite the media firestorm surrounding the Board of Elections and in Wayne County, and comments from people and what's going on. And so I called Mindy, gave her a phone call, and I called her to support her. And, I don't know if she'll remember that conversation, but I said, listen, just, hey, do what you need to do. I'm not worried about it. I'm not putting any pressure on you. You got a lot of work on your hands. I understand. I'm like, so just, let me know if you need anything. Yeah. And that was the phone call I had with her. So I could wait. I'm a very patient person. And I felt confident in 20 votes. That was going to be the result. And it ended up being the official result. But yeah, those 24, 36 hours were pretty rough. I had a lot of people, calling me, texting me, what's the result? What? And I couldn't say anything, they're like, well, did you win? I'm like, no, yes, I can't say. It was trying, but you know what? It wasn't the worst experience of my life.
Yeah. When you, after you knew the outcome, when you started thinking about your work at the county level, how apparent was it at that point that part-time election commissioners were not going to do anymore?
Yeah. So throughout the years in my dealings with the Board of Elections, I ran into a couple small problems with that scenario. You'd go in to hand in a petition and one of the representatives wasn't there. And so like they couldn't both sign off on it, so you had to wait or come back. Just little things like that
Yeah.
I would say were more of an inconvenience than an overall like overarching problem. So I was running into some issues like that, and then I also believe that, like I said, there was a problem, election night, there was a technical error. They worked to resolve it. And then they worked the corrective action at the Board of Elections level. And I think they, the county and the county chairs of the political parties, I think they work swiftly. I think they resolve this issue pretty quick to give a good solution.
Yeah. Last time you and I talked, I think broadband access was one of the top issues. It was kind of connected to this whole idea of economic development. Part of the issue with getting folks to come live in Marion, right, is having good access to broadband, quality broadband. This is probably more of a county issue than it is a town issue, right?
Yeah, I would imagine so. I would link that with the county infrastructure planning.
So when you look at that issue across the whole county, what kind of steps need to be taken in the next few years to get Wayne County where it needs to be?
Well, I think, it's a two-pronged attack. We talk a lot at the county level about bringing in bigger companies, manufacturing companies, in our economic development plan. Now, I'm not on that committee, so I can't speak to what they're planning or what they're currently discussing today. But overall, that would be the plan. Let's bring in manufacturing companies, tax revenue, jobs, things like that. That's great. Yep. However, if you have a high-tech company and you want to put them in Red Creek, they need the ability to communicate globally in most instances. They use a lot of broadband. They use a lot of resources it's not there. It's not there. So again, now, because, we can't put the cart before the horse, we're kind of stuck developing in areas that are already supporting, those capabilities instead of expanding outward. So Marion alone, I was just looking at the broadband map that we could find on the state website. And we still have a lot of areas that have very little to like no access at all. It's 2024.
Yeah.
And these are areas, most our town has public water, but they don't have broadband, they don't have internet. So the solutions to that, I don't know. I would be open to allowing more towers. I'd be open to allowing, studies to happen and supporting those. Anything to move in that direction, some movement would be nice.
Is there any frustration with how broadband coverage at the state level, because the state obviously has spent a ton of money over the years expanding broadband, but a lot of the frustration, it seems like at the local level, is the way the different providers are actually accounting for the growth and the expansion versus the boots on the ground, the reality like that you're describing in Marion. Is there frustration pointed to the state on that? And if so, what would you like to see state leaders be doing a little differently on this front to better position the county, the town, with getting everybody access to quality broadband?
Yeah, I mean, I know what I know. Most people don't have the level of knowledge that I have about state operations and what has been done, what hasn't been done, right? Like most people don't want to know. Yep. So I don't fault them there. However, one of the big roadblocks in rural areas is the lack of providers, the lack of choice. It's in my opinion, it has been a monopoly for many, many years with Spectrum. And, we have Spectrum, we have no other choice. And we just went out we had 3 days of outages for our Wi-Fi at home, and there's no prorated discount. There's no price negotiation. There's no, as a consumer, you can't even call and threaten, use that power to say, hey, I'm going to drop you as a provider and go with so-and-so. You don't even have that. So really, it's they can charge whatever they want. There's no competition in the area. And I'm very against that. Very, very against that. I don't think that is a good business model to have. And at the state level, I don't know what we're going to see anything different at that level. I really believe, they get involved with certain partnerships with companies and, provide them with the grants, with the contracts to provide these services through the idea of a social program. And you're kind of stuck with them. And I don't want to see that for Wayne County as well, or any county. I don't want to see, hey, we can provide broadband to everybody, but it's only through Spectrum because that's who the state contracted with. I don't want to see that.
We've seen some examples with mixed results in terms of success with community broadband projects. Do you think that could be something eventually that perhaps the county or individual towns work together to try and go toward?
Well, I would have to do my homework a little bit more on that concept. I haven't read too much about that. But I'm open that the less state government involvement in our communities, the better. So I'm always open for a community within itself to figure out their problems and to pay for it themselves and to implement it themselves. So if there's anything out there like that, I'm open to it for sure to take a look at.
Butler Correctional Facility. Obviously, to most folks watching or listening, it probably isn't even on the front of their mind or even in the back of their mind because it's been closed for so long at this point. 8, 10-ish years, I'm thinking somewhere 13, in that.
Something like that.
So now the county is really putting some energy toward figuring out what's going to be next for it. Where do things stand right now from your perspective? And when you think about best case scenario for that property, it's very rural. It is pretty far removed from any sort of population center. What's the best case scenario for that?
Yeah, so that's the Butler Correctional Facility is, is a very unique area. Like you said, it straddles 2 towns. It has some geographic challenges. I don't have enough knowledge on the topic to offer a solution or to offer any of my thoughts on it. However, I do know that the state has been involved and since 2017 or 16 for a long time. And they made some weak attempts to get requests for proposals out there. And then they closed that down and that didn't go anywhere. And so now we're looking at it, at the county level and saying, well, we want it back, obviously. We want it back from the state's clutches. So that decision could be made at the local level and not the state level. So, how easily that's going to be accomplished, I'm not sure. In my experience with New York State is once they have something, they really like to hold on to it.
Yeah.
It is an asset in their pocket, right? It's 200 acres of land. So, it is a big chunk of property that, they're holding on to and waiting for some kind of magical wand to come through and say, we're going to make an industrial park here in the middle of nowhere with no support for it locally. Right. So I would like to see it turned back over to the county so that the towns that border it, Wolcott and was it Red Creek?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Their citizens can have say too. Yeah. We don't want this to be a backdoor, behind closed doors deal. When whatever happens, the people just have to live with. I'd like to see a lot more community involvement there. But currently, the county is reaching out, and I believe they just completed a study, the feasibility study on that, to see what it can do, what the potential is, where it is. But I do know every day it sits as it is, we're losing money on it and it's decaying. And, we know with structures, the more time that goes by, the less likely it is for them to be revitalized.
Yeah.
So time is of essence to figure this out.
Yeah. Ambulance service. I want to talk a little bit after this about first responder services in general in Wayne County. But when it comes to ambulance specifically, obviously Wayne County has taken some steps to remedy the coverage issues that exist around Wayne County. How's that going? And do you think the county is in a better position now than it was if you look back a couple of years?
Yeah, I do think they are in a better position now. I see the work being done, physical work, right?
Yeah.
People like to see that.
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about it and put it on paper. It's another thing to actually have it come to fruition. I think that's very important to build that transparency factor I was talking about in local government. And, there was a lot of speculation around this program of, oh, you're going to kill smaller, ambulance services. You're going to poach EMTs. Well, isn't that what we want as a competitive market for our services? To me, that signifies that we're going to get the best of the best and you should pay them the best of the best accordingly. I think the low wages and hard hours in job is part of the reason of the decline in our first responders participation, especially in rural areas where you may be sitting around for hours waiting for a call. But I like what they're doing with it. I had a few questions regarding this when I was running, and I told them, hey, I have to look into this more. But I like the idea of it. I rather have a umbrella service than no service. And I think the county administrator took the proper steps to ensure that we'll always have coverage, no matter what that looks like. And so I will support that going forward. And I'd like to see more bases added in the future as well. Right now, I think there's 3.
Yeah.
4. I think they're putting 2 in Lyons.
Plan to be. Yeah.
So, and like I said, I'm okay with the plan. I looked at the numbers, 15 million implementation cost, to me is worth a life, right? That's fine. And we have to also be able to practice within like our means of a rural area as well. We can't expect, areas like Rochester in their services that they provide to work at that level as well. So it's going to be different. And I think a lot of people are a little hesitant because it is going to look different.
Yeah.
But again, I'm okay with services being provided. I don't really care where they come from. I think they're worth the money and they're pivotal.
You're going to kill local ambulance companies was a real live argument against this?
So I saw a lot of articles I was reading about this topic that was one of the concerns from some local people that, they're going to shut down smaller ambulances corps and recruit and poach EMTs and medics to the larger countywide program. That's not what we're trying to do.
If you're watching, or anybody watching or listening, if you are aware of an ambulance corp that's a town or village or private entity that's growing, please, josh@fingerlakes1.com is the email. I want to talk to them because they don't exist.
Right.
From all of the research and all the coverage of this region in upstate New York, these small companies are shrinking and disappearing, not because of county operations. County operations are becoming more common because they're necessary. So let's talk about fire service. This is another one where it doesn't seem to have the same level of urgency connected to it that the ambulance issue that we see play out in a bunch of counties, Cayuga County, Yates County, even Ontario County to some extent. But this is kind of it feels like the next wave crisis we've heard elected officials in other counties call the shortage of first responders a crisis. How does Wayne County fare right now on that front from your point of view, from your vantage point, especially in and around Marion? But then also, do you see that as something that may eventually have to come under the county umbrella because of the trends that we're seeing in volunteerism overall?
Yeah. And, like I just said about, civic responsibility, we're at the same level when it comes to volunteerism.
Yeah.
It's plummeted. And I don't think it's because the interest isn't there. I think it's because volunteerism is no longer looked at as something to provide to give back to your community. I think a lot of times the younger generations are, it's more of like a forced thing for them to do, or they have to do it, right? And then, you add on, it's a completely different generation. They want money. They want money for their time. And, I can't disagree with them for that, right? Right down the state mandates for training. That's very involved to be a firefighter, to be an EMT. It's time consuming. Most of the time you have to leave town. You have to go out of town to go to a place to get this training. And, and they're not paid for it.
Yeah.
And I don't blame them for not wanting to lose your time with your family and money. And if you work, you have to take the time off. And I think it's just a cycle of a lack of compensation. Now, if that compensation happens to be money, great. But it could be compensation in other areas. How about a tax break?
Yeah.
Right? Here, if you serve and you volunteer on your fire department or EMTs, you get a 10% tax break on your property taxes. There has to be some level of compensation to reward the risk. It is a risky job. My husband was a volunteer firefighter for the Penfield Fire Department. He was, I think, 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
And although he loved it and he enjoyed his time there, there's still things also that affect his life because of it, of the things he's seen. And so we don't take that into account either, is maybe a lot of people no longer wish to put themselves in situations where they're seeing trauma and death and, really nasty situations without that compensation part. So, again, I do believe it is a crisis. I talked to our fire chief, Bill, really super nice guy. I called him in my office. It was the first week I was in office. And I reached out to him. I said, "Hey, Bill, I want to meet with you." He goes, "This is the first time anyone from the town has ever met with me on a formal encounter." I'm like, "Oh, well, welcome to my office." And, we talked about things, how they are utilizing grants more. I think that's a revenue, a path they can go down for a lot of different departments. They're using grants to get equipment, to do upgrades to their facilities. But he had some of the same concerns. He says, the restrictions and the training requirements are really a burden on recruitment.
Yeah. And oftentimes when we talk to different folks in volunteer organizations in general, they'll say, well, we're competing with second jobs. We're competing with, childcare. We're competing with a lot of things that spread way outside of that. Couple topics left here to hit. The Village of Wolcott, considering dissolution. Obviously, unique situation and one that you're observing. You're not anyway involved. I'm not trying to go there with this. But I'm curious, when you see a village in your county potentially dissolving into the town and removing that layer of local engagement, concerned, comfortable, kind of in between? What are your thoughts when you see that playing out nearby?
I'm a little bit in between. I grew up in a village. I grew up in the village of Honeyett Falls, New York. So that's in the town of Mendon. And, I enjoyed village life. It was nice. You did feel closer to your community members and your elected official. We had a mayor. And you did feel like it was easier to connect at that level than at the town level. And it's definitely something where we're seeing the dissolutions of villages across the state more and more. It's hard to fight for that funding and those resources but then have that over-encompassing town protection and budget with you. I'm indifferent. Each town is different. Each village is different. Each populace is different, what they want. So, as long as they're gathering the input from the community and they're holding town halls and they're providing a lot of information on what this means moving forward, I'm okay with it. It's those areas where if this is only done at the administration table, then, I start to have a problem with. And because people need to know what exactly this means. And I don't think a lot of people do know what it's going to mean moving forward. So, as long as the supervisor there is doing his due diligence to get the information out to the people, if it's voted on, it's voted on, and that's it. You got to respect that process.
Last question. And this is connected to the complexity of your term that you are about to embark on, or that you are embarking on now. 2-year term. So I can't ask you, I usually ask the question 4 years from now, what does a successful first term look like to you? It's 2 years. And like we were talking before we came on here, it's really probably more like 15 months of work before you have to start campaigning again, if you choose to run again. So what does a successful term look like for you in the town of Marion as you look ahead to the next 2 years? Obviously, local elections, thanks to the New York State changing when local elections are held, your seat would be one that would fall into even-numbered years. That would be a change. It's being appealed now by Onondaga County. They filed a suit against the state to try and undo this. But that probably won't be successful, if we're being completely honest here. So when you look ahead, what is a successful first term?
Yeah. So for me, again, facing the challenges that are coming in the next 3 years for me, and going through that process of making local elections on even years is going to be quite challenging. So I'll actually end up in the next 5 years, I'll actually end up having 3 terms. So, my first 2 here, I started, and then, and I'll have to run again for a term of 1 year. And then I'll have to run again for another term of 2 years. So that is what that political calendar looks like for me. And in my mind, I feel like that's all one term. I do plan on running again. I could tell you right now, this is not a one and done situation for me. So I am looking at longer projects for my first term, looking to really put things in place, policies, procedures in place that we could start working on in the second term. That is my hope, at least. And my first term for me is really about just integrating myself into the community. We're really trying to build a rec program out of nothing, out of thin air. We're working on that already. That is already in the works. And so that would be a very big success for me if within the next 15 to 18 months, we had a rec program that we could, rely on. That'd be huge. Another indicator of success for me, I think, is getting more people to our public meetings, more participation, and and I would love to see more people run for town board as well. We have 2 seats up in 2025, and I would love to see a race at that level. And so I implore anybody watching who lives in Marion that if you want to run for office and hold the town board seat, it's 2025 is coming up, and run for office. Even if you lose, it's a great way to get to know the community, to know the process, and it might spark something in you that you never know you had. So those are kind of the key indicators for me of success at this moment. And then trying to figure out how to hold office for a year and then another 2 years. So, we might be discussing, with the people. It has to be voted on, making this a 4-year term at supervisor level.
Yeah. Summer, appreciate the time. Thanks for coming down.
Thank you, Josh.